Okay, guys. Well, thank you guys for everybody who did show. I appreciate it. I know we come from all over the world, so really, really happy to have you here and taking the time with us. We're here, and I'm excited to introduce Edgar to you guys. I am Penny. I am your community manager slash moderator here in Discord, and I've just been really, really lucky to get to know so many of you already. Such amazing and talented artists, and a lot of talent we have. Even just in this chat, I know some of y'all's work is just really impressive. I love getting to work right beside all of you and just get the chance to help us feel supported and have this community be what it needs to be for everybody here. We want a place where we can all kind of collaborate, where we can post our works in progress, get some feedback, meet these incredible, crazy, talented mentors, people that we look up to and whose work inspires us. So I know that you guys are probably just as excited as I am to be in the same call with Edgar, which is really awesome. But thank you guys for showing up. If there's ever anything I can do for you, or if you're just looking to hang out and do some work together, like I'd love that. We've got a general channel that I'd love to pop in with you and just do some doodles. I'm a concept artist and illustrator myself, so I do enjoy, on my pastime, my own personal projects. I'd love to meet with more of you. But yeah, I just want you guys to feel supported. Working alongside John at Vessel Forge has been great. We've seen a lot of crazy talent come in. Like I said, we're preparing for GDC, so we can't wait to meet you guys in person if we can. We're going to have a lot of amazing giveaways and, a couple of cool exclusive events lined up that we're going to be taking part in. So we can't wait to announce those for you. But anyway, that's enough about me. Vessel Forge is here for you guys whenever you're interested in taking a cool mentorship with us or just hanging out with us in our community. You're always welcome here. But yeah, let me go ahead and pass the mic over to Edgar. He is our amazing 3D environment mentor. If I can just go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, my name is Edgar Martinez. I've been in the video game industry for over 20 years, and I'm currently working at Naughty Dog. I've been at Naughty Dog for like the last 10 years, and I've been really happy working there. It's really challenging for me, and it's been a great journey working there and learning so much from so many different artists that work with us, and over the years too, over the past other artists that also work there. So but when I started like a really long time ago, like really not knowing that I was going to actually work on either video games or anything related to like 3D. Like early in the 90s, I kind of stumbled into a lot of like experimental 3D art videos where I was like so fascinated learning wonder like how who's working in this, who's doing this like 3D things that like at the time I didn't even know it was called 3D. It was some like really unique things that like I've been telling all my friends, like, oh, I saw this like art stuff that some videos where like there's some animation and some like really creative things and like people is like, what are you talking about? Like I have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, are you like dreaming this or something? But it's like, no, like I'm trying to do this thing. I'm trying to learn, trying to figure it out. And I was at this time, I was in Miami where, there was really no one that understood what I was talking about. But like I was really eager to continue learning and fascinated with, you know, to trying to figure out who and how people do that. And I stumbled into a few things, back then, and I learned about the Ringling Art School in Florida, where they actually teach this animation stuff. So I actually traveled there, on my own and figure out like, oh, what do you guys do? Like, how do like where do I even work if I go to school like this? So it was like a lot of more questions, and I didn't have like the YouTube or the information that we have in the internet right now to figure anything out. Everything was just like word of mouth in a sense, and I decided to try to apply to the school, and they denied me. I didn't get to the school. They
Oh,
only took
wow.
like a few, amount of people a year, and they told me like, no, there's a long list of people that wants to come here, so you're just gonna have to wait until like next year, And at that time, I also found out about the Art Institute, and I also went there, and they took me right away somehow. I didn't really have any experience in arts, that I can show on, but I was really eager to learn, and that's how I, eventually learned it into the Art Institute. And as soon as I started there, I was like, moving myself up and like trying to learn everything I can, even though I was like right at the beginning of the school, and because of the, as soon as I signed in, I actually got an internship to work in some company that just like started over there in Miami that were doing some motion capture, tests, and so I went there and I learned, oh, like they're doing this motion capture stuff, and like, they're testing like animation, and you can put like a suit on, and that you can record your. This is like really early on, like early at the end of the 90s. Where like, I didn't even know that was even a thing. And I remember at that time, it was like about uh maybe the Matrix was about to come out, and then like this is the technology that they use in the Matrix and stuff. So I was like so eager to learn, and and because of that, I eventually got another job, at where I was in school in NBC. Uh, so I was doing a lot of the broadcast graphics there while I was going to school. So I was like pretty busy early on since I was in school, trying to figure out everything that I can to be able to like learn as much as I can in everything, every opportunity that I can. So that's pretty much how I started. Like in the graphic art jobs, and I continued working in that motion capture, for a while until they closed it down. And I,
Mm.
eventually, once I finished the Art Institute, I was able to create my demo reel with a bunch of animation tests that I did during that time, and I eventually won the portfolio review and stuff. And because of that, I ended up getting a contact uh, with some people that were doing outsourcing for video games at the time, where like no one was doing outsourcing for video games, and they asked me if I wanted to start working and creating some like geometries and doing some like props and stuff. I was like, I have no idea anything about video games. Like to me, like my idea from going to school was I wanted to work in VFX, and I want to go work in movies, and I'll eventually will move to California and I'll work some like the movie industry. And that actually did not work out at all. But I started working with these people doing some outsourcing and learning about, doing some art for outsourcing was like really new to me, like, doing like low poly and like texturing and like doing these like things that I even never learned in school at all. So that's how I started in video games somehow, you know, and from there, I worked doing outsourcing for like about 4 years, and I work in a lot of smaller little games. And as you can tell, my first video game I ever worked on, it was a car racing. It was like I IHRI, like a drag racing car. So I had to like model a few cars and put in like all the stickers in the cars and stuff. So it was like my first actual 3D, you know, job in video game industry, where I have to like model a few cars and texture them, putting like all these stickers into the car.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
pretty fun. It was like pretty early on, where like we didn't even have like it was only like small, what we can call right now maybe like phone games. They were like really basic, games done in PC. I don't even know who played those games, but I worked on those, and I work in a lot of smaller little games like that. I work on Brass, SpongeBob,
That's
Scooby Doo,
amazing.
all those
I'm
like
pretty sure
little
I've
things
played a
that
lot of
make.
those. Yep.
Yeah, like I wasn't really into video games at all. I was just like trying to learn as much as I can while I was getting paid a little. It was almost like a freelance type of thing. But then I started getting more and more better jobs there. And I think like the first console work I ever done was like in one of the football games. I had to create, how to model and texture a whole stadium, like a football stadium. And that was really challenging because I had to reference actual geometry from the actual stadium. So I took like a bunch of pictures on the stadium. I actually went to the stadium, took a bunch of pictures, and and then try to recreate it as accurate as possible. And it was pretty fun. But that's pretty much like the first console game I worked on. And after that, I worked in like many other console games. I did that for like almost 4 years, until I eventually decided like, hey, look, if I want to continue in the game industry, I need to work in a developer where they actually do their own games. And that's where I decided to start looking to move to California. And in California, I landed the job working Ready Done. And Ready or Done, at the time they were working on the PSP God of War, and I didn't really wanted to work on PSP because I was already doing a lot of different, you know, more high end, props and stuff where how to like bake normal maps at the time where PS3 was like coming out. All the companies,
Mm.
back then they were trying to figure out like how to bake normal maps, how to do this like new 3D, bake arts and actually implementing those into the game. So I was working in outsourcing, trying to figure out with so many different companies, trying to work on trying to implement this like new technology into it. And some of those games that I work in is like Medal of Honor, and I work on like a Dragon Age and Alien Colony, Marines, and I did Borderlands, and I work in Call of Duty 4. I think that was probably one of the biggest jobs, and I was like really proud that I was gonna work on like Call of Duty. Oh my God, that's like so awesome, and that's what pretty much land me the job to move to California and work with Ready at Dawn. And once I jump into Ready at Dawn, I told them I didn't want to work on PSP because that would be like kind of like less than what I was doing before. But at the same time, I never worked on a developer, so it was kind of like a balance between like, okay, look, I need to know how to you know our environments are getting built into a game, and like all the process that requires to put all the art into the game, which I never done before. So it was kind of like a balance. So we like, okay, I'm gonna trade all the things that I know how to do with normal map and the high end stuff that I was doing, and learning from the PSP production, like how to everything works in a video game. So that was like pretty much my introduction into developer, and that was about 15 years ago when I did that, and it was pretty fun.
That's
uh,
amazing. I'm also thinking, like Giovanna just posted, Dragon Age is one of my favorite franchises. You were listing off a lot of our favorite franchises, so you've really, just I think it's really inspiring because a lot of artists come into this thinking maybe it's going to be, and it's maybe not always this case, but I think that it's hard for us to take on roles that we might not think are as star-studded, at first, and then kind of work our way up toward those larger projects, those larger, I guess, positions that are available, which is really inspiring to hear that that's kind of how your career started out, is that you were taking on these roles that were amazing. They were still very, very valid, but you really kind of gained your traction, after God of War, I think, or maybe not your traction, but like you really expanded the amount of IPs that you were working on, and I think that that's really cool. Starting out, and what you were saying is like just putting stickers on a car, all the way to working up to where you are now. So I just wanted to call that out, that that's really amazing. Um,
Yeah, like it wasn't like easy. It was like everything
yeah.
was just like a little step, little by little, trying to get. And even though I worked for like 4 or 5 years in that outsourced company, I never got credit of anything I did.
Mm,
My name was never in any of the games I worked on. Like it was, that's the reason I wanted it to, move to, to a developer where like I'm actually getting credit, and I'm actually doing
right.
something, from the beginning all the way to the end, of the production. So those, kind of like, the breaking point where like, okay, this is where, now I'm gonna stick into video game,
Yeah.
career, and try to be as good as possible, and continue learning and pushing the technology. So as soon as I moved to Radio Dawn, one of the things that they told me was like, hey, look, the PS3 just came out, we're working on PSP, but our goal is to work on console. We want to, our next game, we wanted to make sure, we're doing the higher end stuff, and we're gonna, trying to learn from all the stuff that you did, and trying to implement those into a new project. And that new project was going to be the Order 1886, but at that time it wasn't even called that. It was just, and it was just an idea that that's what we wanted to do, and they didn't even have an engine to work on. So at the beginning, my job was to work with the engine team that was making the engine and starting testing all the things that we wanted to implement into the engine. And we're talking about like, okay, normal map, specular maps, things that like we right now take for granted, that we
Yeah.
use. So at
Yeah.
the beginning, we had to, build everything from scratch and test, all this, and that was my job. So I didn't really get to work too much in the PSP game. I was just kind of helping, the team, pretty much like such a talented team, programmers and like video graphic programmers and other designers to implement all these tests into the game. So it was like like going back and forth between like learning a little bit about the PSP technology, but also pushing the new stuff. And about like a year after I worked there, that's when we started actually production of the Order 1886, and it was one of the most uh, hard and like not knowing what we were gonna do with this game, because we thought that we're gonna do the best, we're gonna do better than Naughty Dog, we're gonna do better than every other game there. But like we work on PSP, so like it was a big challenge to try to like get everybody in the same page, and be sure that everybody that was working there has the talent to be able to do the high end stuff, which they didn't. So it was really hard to even hire new people to tangle this new project, because everybody says like, wait, Radio Dawn only works on PSP, like like why you want to hire such a high talent, you know so it was like it was a hard for a lot of years. And in top of that, the Radio Dawn, uh we did not have the PS4 at that time. It was in
Mm.
construction, so we didn't have even a console to even work on. So we had to start from pretty much almost working in a PC game for many years until we actually got a console to actually test the game. And oh yeah, so that was
Wow.
pretty
Yeah,
interesting.
I think I have a question here in the chat. More or less, how many years did it take for you to go from that smaller production, I guess, level, the smaller productions without full participations, sorry, to working on games you were a part of from start to end?
So I mean, when I started Ready Done, I think I worked like a year. They actually finished the PSP game, but like I wasn't really part of it. I was part of the new project, so I wasn't really, I did a little bit of it, uh, like a couple of levels that I, kind of got my hands into it. But literally, I didn't finish any games. I was just working, so much pre-production the whole time, to be able to, work on the next, which is the Order 1886. So I didn't really ship anything until like, 5 years after, I
Mm,
worked there,
okay.
when we actually finished, the Order 1886.
And coming, with all of your knowledge now, like looking back, like what were some of those bigger challenges that, maybe made you kind of like second guess like this pathway was right for you? Or was there any like doubt in your mind, speaking to, a lot of people in the room who I know are trying to find their own path and create their own narrative the way you have. It's their own journey. What are some of those challenges that you faced, and what were some of the bigger, I guess, ways of overcoming them, or methods that you came across that helped you overcome those?
Well, I think like I always thought that video game art was kind of like like I said, I wanted to work in VFX. I wanted to work in like the most
Right.
realistic environments. I always thought I wanted to work in environments since early on. So to me, working in video games is almost like, oh, this, I don't want to work in this like cartoony looking kind of art that is like
Realism's where
really
it's at.
basic. And so like I wanted to and like I remember seeing like even like back then I didn't even thought in my mind I was gonna work already Naughty Dog. But like I saw when they started doing like, let's say, Uncharted first, the first game and the second game, there's like, oh, I mean, they look really cool, but like that's really not my style. I want to do like really
Mm,
realistic, really high end stuff. So I was pushing to put as much detail on like my levels. And most people were like, oh, that's like way too much detail, you're gonna have to like bring it down a little. So to me, I was always trying to push to the best looking stuff, even though we probably could not afford it in a game at that time with memory and stuff, but like to me, like looking at reference and try to match as close as possible everything and putting as much detail. I always wanted to do that. I just couldn't do it in video games for the at least the first portion of it. And this game was the one the order was like, okay, we need to do this realistic stuff. So to me, that was like, the biggest challenge. Like, how can I push myself to do the most realistic stuff without knowing if I can get there? I didn't really know. I just was pushing little by little, trying to like, focus on like trying to get the best looking, models, the best looking, compositions, the best looking, things that I could see from, watching movies, from watching, other artists out there, especially VFX artists at the time. I did visit, I went to every conference that I could go, like SIGGRAPH and like,
Mm,
motion picture conferences. And like, it wasn't uh, not even E3 I went. It was only like all movies. So to me, I always reference movies, at the time. It's like I want to make, I want to get, my environment to look like this in a video game. Maybe some, in the future, the technology is gonna get better to be able to like, have video games that look almost like movies. So I
yeah.
knew that was gonna come at some point. So I always pushing for be able to get the high end you know stuff early on. I think that's what like kind of put me a little bit out of everyone else. Everybody else was just trying to make it. I was just trying to push to something that I never seen before.
I love that. I'm also a huge fan of movies, but I think there's something there with getting the right references and being inspired by those things to help shape your style, your direction. That's really incredible, especially hearing you, going out to the physical locations, taking pictures, being, pulling from those places and getting those exact textures you're looking for up close and personal and taking them in the way that you need them to be taken. That's really cool. There is a website called Shot Deck if anybody is interested. I think maybe I can drop a link. Shot Deck or it's a screencaps.net or something. I think is what it's called. That might be really good too for some extra reference. But I have a question here. So starting out, did you enjoy being able to work on so many separate projects and being able to see how different projects were organized and getting experience through different tasks? I think that kind of covers a good bit.
Oh wow, yeah, absolutely. Because when I was working in outsourcing, like like I said, I was also learning how to be efficient. How to model stuff. But like every company that I work with, they all also were trying to figure out how their engine was working. Like how are they going to implement all this new art stuff? So
Hmm.
like everybody had their different pipeline and different way of baking normal maps, different like ideas of how do we how do we like so every company I was kind of learning, oh, this is how you do this stuff. Okay, that's kind of interesting because these other companies do that's like almost backwards from the way you do it. So like learning from like the pipeline of all these all these bigger and smaller companies that I worked on, kind of pushed me to like, okay, now I'm getting a sense of like, okay, like everybody's different and everybody's doing it in a different way, and I just have to adapt to how they're working on and trying to mimic their pipeline, and and learning from the and then like every other project that I have is like, okay, I learned this from this company, I learned these little tricks here, they didn't like this, and so I learned a lot from working in outsourcing, because it gave me a little range of like not only working in environments, but I work on like vehicles, I work on like characters, I work
Mm.
on like for example, like in BioWare I had to do like a lot of costumes and weapons and like hair and like things that I never in my mind I was gonna be able to do, or wanted to learn about it, but somehow like that was the job that I had to do, and I had to like figure it out, at the time that I was actually doing the job too. So
That's amazing. Yeah, that's another thing that I hear a lot of students or people learning is like, well, do I need to just focus on the one thing and I mean, there is a level, an element to that, obviously, and staying true to what your goals are, as an environment artist or as a character artist. But you become so much more valuable a player if you're able to adapt and work on the fly on other tangential projects, right, or things that are requested of you. So having those skills is extremely important, or at least the flexibility to learn those skills on the fly.
Yeah, I think right now it's kind of easier because there is so much information, and all the
Yeah,
the game
that's
industry
true.
is already sort of established, and like you can find out, you go to school for like a particular thing, and you don't really, if your environment, you're not gonna switch to characters, it's not gonna be that easy. It's like a completely different set of skills. And even
Hmm.
if I decide to, I want to work in VFX right now and do environments for VFX, that will be like almost starting from scratch because the way they work is so different. So, but like back then, like I didn't really have a career in mind. I was just like, every opportunity, I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna learn from it, and that's gonna take me to some place at some point
Hmm.
in the future. At the time, you just don't know like where it's gonna take you. But like every opportunity that I could to get my hands into something creative, I try to do it without guessing, if I'm going to be able to do that or not. It was, to me, everything is just a challenge. Like learn this and do it and try to be successful. You may not succeed all the time, but the idea is you putting all your effort into it, and eventually will pay off.
I love this. On that note, like what inspired you or motivated you to become a mentor now that you're here with us?
Well, I mean, I've been, I haven't really done mentoring much other than like at inside my job, like learning, getting like new employees and like helping them out, and like especially the, junior ones.
Hmm.
I've been technically mentoring within inside my job, but not never outside, outside my work. And I, throughout the years, I have learned, so much, so many skills, so many skills, not only in the art, but like be able to communicate with other people, communicate with other teams, communicate with other departments. And like it comes a time where I can sit back and like enjoy some of the you know challenges that I have done throughout my life and throughout my career, and be able to share those as much as I can.
Hmm.
Because the reality is like, I think with everything that I have worked on so far, I don't really need to prove anyone else that I can, do what I'm doing. And right now, I'm just enjoy what I do and able to, enjoy passing the knowledge to other people that, I love, to talk to. And like, I enjoy and I appreciate, how they start, especially new people, that they go to school and they're like super excited to work in the industry. And like they're also I see myself in some of them when I started, like having the same passion. So it's almost contagious. So to me, helping anyone else is just a gratitude that I'm able to do it right now.
I love this. During your mentorship sessions, like I guess, what are some of the like technical skills or the workflows that you're trying to help environment artists with? How do you kind of support them with their own goals?
Well, usually, like I would probably first, talk to them and find out, what are their goals,
Hmm.
what do they want to learn, and I'm trying to, I will probably almost like adapt to, their level, and trying to help them throughout throughout the process, like anything, I'm already familiar with like, how environments and like the whole production is. So anything that I can help them with, you know, you know, organizing, especially I think like one of the things that I, like it puts me a little bit out, uh, ahead of like a lot of the people is like I'm really organized with my work. I'm knowing that I already have a lot of experience already. Like I don't want to lose any time. I think I have an idea how I'm gonna start, how I'm gonna organize, my project, and to be able to like, really quick, be able to start doing stuff and not lose any time. I think like I have learned that throughout the years to be really organized and be able to, you know,
Yeah, that
put the
takes time.
ideas first before I even touch, the computer. So when I get to it, I'll able to, implement all those ideas in a really quick fashion and without losing any time.
Speaking of time, I actually just got a question for you. We're curious as to how you balance your job with extra activities like mentoring, it sounds like you're working a 12-hour day or with
Uh,
time and
Oh,
seniority.
I've always done it. Yes,
Yeah.
like my time is always really busy. I also got a couple of kids. I had a family, and like
Yeah, like where do you
I'm
find the
like I'm
time?
eager. I just don't have the time. But like, I'm a person that I'm really busy all the time. I don't sit down in the sofa. I don't chill at all. I'm always active. I'm always doing stuff. So it's to me, it's like the juggling of everything,
Yeah,
and that's
finding
I
your
love
own
it.
space,
Like
your own
and
groove.
yes, like to me, I'm like a non-stop person at all, like all hours of the day.
I think right now I see what kind of hurts a lot of folk is just being distracted. I think a lot of it comes down to being distracted. If you know that you're a victim of your own sort of devices, right? Like go ahead and put them away, during your work time, your personal hours, and you'd be surprised at how much just like having your cell phone or something in the other room can really like just keep you back and focused and save you an hour. You know what I mean? You won't get lost in
Yeah,
a in an algorithm
that
somewhere.
is exactly what I do. I put my phone away when I'm at work.
Yep.
I don't look at my phone. I don't look at any messages. I don't do anything when I'm at work. I'm like complete, and like that kind of did not change after I started working at home. Like, after the
Yeah.
pandemic and we all have to work at home, that did not change my habits. Like I still put my phone away until I'm done with work, and then I can, now look at back all my messages that I got throughout the day and like answer them back and whatever. But like, yeah, I don't do too much social media either as much, you know. So
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy world. Like some of us who are up and coming, like we've got to be kind of ingrained in social media, but there is a balance to be had, I think. You just got to kind of find out what that balance is like for you. If anyone ever needs any extra like time management help or just kind of wants some advice, like please feel free to message me. I mean, I've gone through the ropes on that too. Like I got to figure out my own schedule. I'm definitely willing to talk to you guys about that. Um, but I have one more question for you, Edgar, before we go into maybe a little quick demo, a little tour of some of your processes. But from Rihanna, you mentioned earlier the difficulties of trying to make realistic work with lots of details. Would you say it is still the case today? Like, have things changed, especially for AAA games, right? We're talking like topology, texturing, that kind of thing. Like, is it still kind of hard to, push those boundaries, even though things are pretty like innovative now, you know?
yeah, I think like, that I don't think that will ever change. I
Mm-hmm.
think like the technology is gonna continue pushing, and I think like, if you look back like 10 years ago, what a video game used to look like to how it looks now, it's like, there's more and more detail, and like, that will never stop. Everything's just, you know it takes longer to do everything. And at the time, like long time ago, I had to do everything. I had to model every little single item. But now we have a team. So it's a little bit less, that like that you do, but at the same time it's a lot more work because it's more detail.
Mm.
So yeah, like how do you start? Like, yeah, it's really hard like to kind of explain it, but yeah, I think having an idea, having a lot of reference, and looking back, especially if you're working in like realistic game like that I work on, like, there's easy to find, a lot of reference. If you're working in some like, sci-fi type of, video game, it'll be kind of harder because everything's, different. You
Mm-hmm.
won't have a lot of references out there to look into.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily the games that I've been working on like really realistic when it comes to world scale. So I put a lot of effort into like looking at a lot of reference and like looking in the detail, like how the things are getting constructed. Like like, for example, I'm going to talk about like later on about like some of the stuff that I done with buildings and stuff. But like, to get into, like how I start, it's like looking a lot of reference in
Mm-hmm.
detail. Like going outside, it's like, okay, how does a building gets done? How does, construction, happens? Like what are the steps, they do in real life to, do construction? Like what kind of materials that they use? Like how do they put these materials together? How do they glue them? Did they nail them? Did they saw them together? They weld them together? Like how things are made. I think that's where I start to look into like how I make things realistic. It's like looking at real life, like how things are made in real life. And can I translate those into 3D, and how does that, look like? And I think I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on. Uh, but so I try to implement those ideas early on before I even
Hmm.
start. You know,
Yeah, that's perfect. I again definitely recommend going outside and getting your reference, especially for those tougher environments, like you're saying, like sci-fi. Like you're not gonna have a room covered in goo, right? Like you got to go and find something cool to kind of emulate that and put your references together very cleverly sometimes. But this is great. If you're ready, Edgar, let's go ahead and dive into some screen share, see what you've got cooked up for us.
sure.
And I know everybody's being so kind and patient while we go through all the questions. So feel free to keep on asking. We're gonna take a quick glance back at these right at the end here.
Do you see my screen there?
We sure do.
Right. So, as you can see in some of these images, this is some of the work that I've done in various productions. And one of the things that you can kind of see here is like I have a lot of wood in my scenes. One of the things that like that is it was a challenge, like how do I make so much detail in a small amount of time. And I have to like come up with like try on different techniques to try to like, okay, I have a for example in these images I have a lot of different like planks of wood. I have a lot of different details, like, but I want to speed up the time on trying to make those better. Like how can I like organize myself and trying to like use so many different type of woods, for an example, in this some of these images, and to be able to do those fast. So I had to come up with like a few different techniques to help the process, and trying to come up with using maybe trim sheets at the time. It's like, okay, I'm gonna do like some trim sheets and like have some like pieces of wood, and I'm gonna assemble those pieces of wood. By the time I need to do any of it. For example, if you see here, like in this building, other than brick, I have like a lot of windows. I have frames. I have like doors. I have like all the window frames, all the like paneling, and everything is made out of wood. So like to me, like at the beginning, I need to figure out first of all, how do they make this? Like, do they do they use like 2x4s? Do they use like how big those these trims look like in real life? Starting to like figure out like if I can do like a set of measurements that I can start with. That way, like if I need to do a door, if I need to do a window, or if I need to do anything, everything just kind of matches like real life. Like how do they do it in real time? In real life. And you can kind of see here, like there's so many trims, there is so many pieces of wood, and like
Hmm.
all these like decorative trims and everything. So I needed to like come up with a way of making them fast, and not spending too much time like modeling, unwrapping, and trying to like match my texture to it. So I come up with like a little system that's gonna help me to like do a lot of different type of woods, and not only woods, but like anything that I can use for tallable textures. Like for example, like metal break. For example, I got like these breaks, and then like we got like the break, like little trims and everything. So pretty much my go-to is like trim sheets. Trim sheets is like my goal of making everything really fast and quickly. And you can kind of see in some of these other images where like everything's made out of wood. Like how do I make so much wood so fast? So I'm going to show you some of the tricks that I do. You can kind of see here. And in this game, which is the Last of Us Part One, I had to make a whole, pretty much a whole city, like a whole town, with multiple buildings, a bunch of I think it was total of like over 50 different buildings. So I had to share a lot of wood
Wow.
and a lot of brick, and I had to do them fast, really fast. So pretty much, in this game, I took one sheet, only one texture sheet of wood, and a tallable one, and I pretty much every single building is pretty much sharing the same texture, one texture for all the
Wow.
buildings. So one texture for brick, one texture for for brick, metal, and concrete. So it's three textures to do all the buildings. You know, and not only the buildings but everything else, like all these like panels over here, or any like pergolas, any like stairs, like you can kind of see here, everything's pretty much using one material for the whole entire thing. And even the interiors where I have to do, other panelings, and everything's using pretty much one material. And I'm going to show you, now how I do this. So like once I kind of figure out like what I wanted to do, I started to collect some reference for, what I'm going to do with, uh, for example, in this test that I'm going to show you right now, like I actually, you know, recently went to New Orleans and I took some pictures of a couple of buildings, and I wanted to show them in this presentation. I was like, okay, I see these two buildings here. I want to kind of combine them. I'm making like a really cool building out of this, and I want to do them fast. How do I start to even think about like working on, making this so fast? So the first thing I usually do is I'm gonna work on the windows and I'm gonna work on the doors, because that's what's gonna give me the size of how the building is gonna look like. So I count how many windows I need, like the type of windows I need, how many I need, and how many doors I'm gonna need. And here's some other reference of like some of the doors, some of the windows that I needed to do, and this is actually like I have them here like in Google Maps, so I can kind of go
Mm-hmm.
back and I can kind of see
Look at that.
how detailed some of these windows are. I can start to like judge, okay, like I need all these like kind of trims, I need like glass, all the little things. So I started to like understand what I need to do early on, and I blocked them out like really quick, some of the sizes based on like actual measurements. And so here in this year I have like some kind of uh, ideas of like how windows are get constructed, how the sizes of my windows and my doors. So this is like my guide of like how big my windows needs to be, and how I'm going to construct these windows to make it like really realistic. So I but by looking at this reference, I actually look and made some blockouts of my windows that I need. And so here I have like three doors and uh, four windows. And pretty much by making these like low poly really basic shapes, as you can tell me, it only takes me like, I don't know, maybe 10-15 minutes to model this thing accurately. And I'll use this as my reference to make my actual block up building. And I pretty much I think I did all these seven pieces of geo maybe in less than an hour. And I had them all next to a character, and like they look proportional. And I think I'm going to start with that. And after I started with this, I have my rules here. So this is kind of my rules of of starting with. What you can kind of see here, this is like the size of my building. I usually work with units like meters. So here I got like 3 meters. So my 3 meters for my second floor, and the lower floor usually is either a store or like a restaurant or something, usually bigger. So
Mm-hmm.
my lower floor it's usually 4 meters, and any upper floor it will be 3 meters. And this little area right here, that would be the floor in between each, like the floor in between each floor. So by knowing the size of my building, and now here, this is what I do. I created this like sheet of like pieces of wood, where I'm gonna start creating, all these windows and anything related to wood with this in mind. So this is all set up in inches based on my character. So it's like 1 inch, 2 inch, 4 inch, uh, 8 inch, 12, and this is pretty much the sizes of in a real construction building. That's the type of wood they're going to be using. So I make my kind of little planks of wood you know that I'm going to use to construct everything related to wood in this level. So in this case I'm going to make all these windows and all these doors based on these little pieces of wood. So what this would look like in a texture sheet. So pretty much like here will be my textures. If I look into my texture sheet, so I created my texture sheet based on the same text of density of my, that I need to make my textures on. So for example, 1 inch represent this section of my texture. 2 inches will represent my part and here, and this is of course tileable horizontal. So no matter how much I can stretch these planks horizontally, it will never, you know, change my textile density, and it will always use this trim sheet for it. So I built these pieces of wood, and by using this, now I'm gonna build all my windows, all my doors, and anything related to wood with this in mind. So I use these pieces of wood to start assembling, some windows, and you can kind of see here where I use pretty much these little parts right here, these little doors that are already unwrapped, already set up, ready to just place them and like, scale them properly. So I use this to make the parts that I need to make my window. And you can kind of see here where my frame is. I use like a bunch of different parts to make a window frame, and this is the frame of the window here. And then like this will be the actual door of the window, and this will be the base, and like all the this will be the little trim right here in the middle, and this will be the upper stuff. Once I assembled this, in a really quick fashion. I think it took me to put this together, I don't know, maybe like 20 minutes to put all this. And once I'm happy with it, I assemble the door, and within like less than an hour I already have my window already done,
Look at that.
already unwrapped, and I can put this in the game right away. So like pretty much, doing all these windows, all these seven, objects. I did this probably in less than a day. I had them all already set up and done, inside the game already, like unwrap. You can open the windows, you can close the windows. Everything's already set up. So at this point, I usually give this window to my texture artist, and he's gonna be the one, like,
Hmm.
creating the actual texture, all the shaders, all the materials that you're gonna be able to blend together, and adding all the details when it comes to, like, how the window is gonna be, if it's gonna be green, all the colors, or if it's gonna be like, more, grunge to it, or if we're gonna have like layers to it, all the glass and everything's gonna be attached to it. So that's pretty much how I usually build everything really fast, when it comes to either wood or metal or anything that is like trim sheets and stuff. And you can kind of like, if I go into my Maya scene, I can kind of show you how that looks like, you know, so here in my magazine, I got, like, you see all my little pieces already of wood, already all
Hmm.
assembled, already unwrapped. You can kind of see, here, this is my normal map edge. So I don't really bevel any of my on any of my woods, because I already have the bevel like within the normal map here. And this section right here in the bottom, that would be the, oh, sorry, that will be the caps of my pieces of wood. So that's where it goes, all this like square here. That will be where these caps areas are going to be related to the texture. So once I assemble all these pieces, you can kind of see here, I assemble all these pieces, and I started assembling all my windows. So how does that look with, this is another example where I use like pretty much the same trim. I kind of bended it together. I use other pieces of wood, so I can kind of use, all the trims. And, by doing these two windows, I started assembling all the elements that I'm continue using. Some of this right here, that would be like almost like my kit bash, like kit that I can use to continue creating more and more. So if I need to do more variations of windows or doors, I keep bashing these little objects that I already have it ready to start making more and more. So every time I need to do another window or another door, it'll be less and less time, because I'm already keep bashing from my original ones. So if I look back here, into my final windows, you can kind of see, how detailed they already are. And I don't really need to spend too much time on, like, making, all these kind of bevels and all the stuff, where everything is already, ready to go. And I can just like open with my pivot points already set up properly, and everything you can kind of see is already organized in my layers. Everything's already named, everything's already just ready to send to you know any engine and start working with. So you can kind of see, so this store probably took me a little longer, but once I started doing more and more, it took me less and less time. So
Hmm.
within like, less than a day, I already have all these panelings and all these things already set up in my scene, ready to go. So once I already have all my I don't know if you have any other questions where I can continue.
Oh, yeah, we have got several questions. So let's see. I'll start with Rihanna. Do you use ZBrush at all in your workflow? I know you're here in Maya, but
Well, at this time, I don't because I'm kind of doing layout. I'm not even touching in my 3D scene yet. This is
hmm
to me to just block out like my building. Eventually, if we need to do ZBrush, yes, I do use ZBrush all the time, especially if I have to do organic stuff. But in
hmm
this case, I'm just working in a building. But there's many times that I have to work in organic stuff, like and then I have to like sculpt like rocks or floors or different details or something maybe like some bricks that are like kind of broken, so I have to like sculpt bricks. So yeah, at any time, depending on what I'm working on, I could jump into like any different type of task, either if it's environment, if it's organic, or if it's architectural.
And I know you had said earlier you weren't using any beveled elements, right? But do you use baked bevel trim sheets? Like, is that something you normally do?
Well, at this time, I don't use a lot of bevel trim sheets. I have used it in the past. It all depends on like what you're working on. For example, in this, like I just, I could have baked, all these pieces of geo into a normal map, but I just find that, using this trim sheet, this already gives me, and I'm
hmm
gonna show you how that looks like later on.
hmm
But pretty much, if I unselect my, I think my viewport in Maya is not great, but this already have a bevel here. So when my texture artists come in and start working in these textures, they know that this is where my bevel is. So they can start like, adding into the texture all the little grunches or all the little details that needs to happen in the normal map, right on top of
Yeah,
it.
that makes
That
sense.
way, everything translates into it. And I don't have to, because what happens is like when you bake, a normal map, you already lock the
Yeah, you can't go
normals of
back
the
and change
object,
it.
and
Yeah,
you cannot change it or you cannot add details because it's gonna completely change the break.
that's
So
right.
by doing it this way, I can add, either section. I can, tweak this. I can even, I'll give you an example here. I can even start doing, I can take one piece of, plank and I can add a little bevel to it, or I can add a little detail to it without affecting the edges of my trim sheet.
It's
I can give you an
non-destructive.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can give you an example here. This is just one sheet. I did a bevel here because I didn't have such a round area, but I still did not change the edges of my sheet.
Excellent. Let's see. We
So
have
it doesn't matter if I'm doing a curve like this or doing something like a bevel like this. I can make it without distracting my normal.
Did you create the normal map trim in Designer?
Well, technically, I did this one in sort of Photoshop. I knew what I needed to do. But yes, you can do it in Designer. You can do it in any program. It doesn't really matter where you do it, as long as it works with the geometry or, the texture. So,
Okay.
like the tool, it doesn't really matter where you make it as long as it works.
Mm, good advice. Uh, let's see. Rayana was also curious. What are the dotted lines in your topology?
The dotted lines.
Dotted lines. Rayana, if you want to emphasize a little more, we'll come back to that one. Let's see. What do you think is the longest and hardest part of creating environment pieces?
Not knowing how to start.
Just,
I
yeah,
think that's
filling
like
the
the
blank
longest.
page.
Like,
Classic
yeah, I
artist
think like
problem.
at the beginning, you have like 70 different ways to start something and you just have to pick one, and sometimes it takes a lot long to start, but once you figure out like, what to do, it goes a lot faster. I think at the beginning, trying to start with something, you don't know what technique you're going to be using, and you may have to struggle a little bit at the beginning to try to figure out how to do it, but once you kind of get the hang of it, it just goes a lot faster and you get more creative. And at the beginning, it's always really frustration because you don't know if it's gonna go right. I'm spending a lot of time trying to do something, and I don't know if it's gonna even work or not.
That's an all-around artist problem.
Yeah,
Yep,
that never changes. No,
never
no, no
changes.
matter how much experience you have, it never changes.
Love it. Let's see. What advice can you, I guess like because this was a personal question, what advice would you give for people who struggle with the balance between, you know, pushing for like that finished, refined, highly rendered product and kind of like balancing when to stop and like the optimization, focusing more on optimization rather than the fluffiness and the shiny,
Sure. I
look at the
think
end?
I think we like in all of us, as artists, we always trying to start with like all the detail, right?
Right, right,
So I
right.
think like one of the things I always thought about is like start from from the beginning. Don't jump into the detail too quickly. I think
Very
like
guilty
at
as
this
well.
point, I think everyone does. Even still do it. I think like like doing this, for example, like these doors and window. You don't see any of the details like door frames, like you don't see any of the hardware, you don't see any of like door handles, you don't see any of it. At this point, this is where I want to start putting this stuff in the game, where it's like really simple shapes, but it still gives me what it is. I'm not really, almost like sometimes I don't even texture stuff, I just put colors on stuff, sort of represent what eventually it's going to look like. I put this in the game early on, and that's once we start playing and we start like looking at like, okay, how far is this going to be to the character, maybe I don't need to spend too much detail on this. Or that's where I started to notice that, like, okay, like if I want to go back to this, and I started doing like door handles and stuff, that's just not going to take me too long, but I don't need to do this right away. And I just want to have them ready in game, test them, see if it works before I start jumping into detail. I think that's where like I save a lot of the time. Where like sometimes we started to do this window and try to do all these like bevels and all the stuff, and we spend so much time on it, and they're like, oh, but this window is gonna be in the third floor and no one's gonna see it. So
Bummer.
until you don't see it in game,
Yeah,
like you don't I'm never gonna spend any time on it until I don't think it's necessary to do it. So that's where I balance, where like I start with something really simple and I make sure everything works in game before I even start doing any beveling or any details or adding any stuff to it.
excellent.
And
Well,
you can kind of see here on my next thing where like now you can kind of see that I started to make to make the building, which I already have it here. I started to make really simple walls, as you can tell here, no details, nothing
no
at all, just
details.
really simple.
Yep.
Something simple just to see what it is and to see if it's actually working or not. And once I put it all together, I have like pretty much my kit here to make this kind of building and to refer back, to see how it'll look. Oh, I think I changed mine. Uh, now I started to assemble my building, and here it is my building. Pretty much like already assembled, and pretty much I think like between doing the windows and like these simple walls and this kind of like deck on it, I think I didn't take even 2 days to do this whole building the way you look at it right now. And pretty much like in less than 2 days I already have this building at this point as you see it right now. As you see, you don't have any details on the walls, anything, but everything's realistic. I can put this in game. I can start looking at it and seeing like how everything is working. How everything's pretty much if it doesn't work, so I go back to like, okay, like now I need to tweak my sizes, I need to tweak this and make this pretty much as good as possible before I even start doing any details. You can kind of see all my parts are here. They're really simple shapes, and I don't do any detail until everybody's happy and all my directors are happy with the environment and everything else. That's when I can go back and like, okay, now like I know I'm gonna be walking right next to this sidewalk. I want to put all the detail on the bottom, and maybe you don't get access to be in these upper floors. So I'm never gonna put any detail that I don't need to on it.
Until you're for
So
sure.
that's where I
Yep.
spend my time only where it needs to. And at this point, like when everybody's happy, my designers are happy, and like the directors are happy, and everybody's good with like how I'm looking. That's where I start. Doing all the details needed, for it. So
Amazing. I have one, I have, well, one, I have got a really good question from Tudorica. Um, okay, so I'm gonna just go ahead and read it off here. Bear with me, Edgar. Since Naughty Dog is well known for their vertex painting techniques to blend multiple materials, now that in UE you have the options of mesh paint, UE Unreal Engine, mesh paint, would you still use vertex paint? And if yes, are there certain situations where this is still better than these newer techniques?
You see, newer techniques are always going to come. I think it all depends how the pipeline is set up in the company that you work on. And in the company in Naughty Dog, we use vertex paints forever, and we're going to continue using that. But sometimes now we use, a lot of different other techniques that are coming into play, and we're always testing different ideas. For you know it's all going to be depends how what kind of objects, for example, like I'm working in like rocks. The skills to make rocks and how you blend those together could be completely different than environments where I have architectural work. So it all depends on what you're working on, how those the kit works, how does the materials work with each of those objects. So you know yeah, maybe for buildings we still going to be able to paint in vertices, all the maps, but doesn't mean the other ones are not also valid. Everything is valid if, and as long as working in the game. And that's what's important. The techniques that we learn out there, sometimes are valid, sometimes are not. It all depends how you use them and how it's applied into the game. So
They have a follow-up in the mesh paint menu, there are two options, texture color and textures. What's the difference between them? And is one better for optimization than the other? And are there any certain situations you would use one over the other?
I'm not really too familiar with how that works. I haven't really used it in production, so I wouldn't be
Okay,
able to tell you much about how it works and like what the benefits of them because I never used them. So I
that's
won't be
fair.
able to answer as specific as you wanted to.
That's fair. Uh, I guess back to this building, and the creation of this from start to finish, how long would it take you to spend on a building like this just to see it all the way through to game?
Well, I think like once for example, like if I have an image here of one of the buildings I worked on. Uh, It's hard to tell depending, like some buildings are they're easier, some are more complicated. Let me see if I can scroll down to some of these images over here. For example, like all these buildings are there's different details to them, so it's kind of hard to judge which one spend is longer than the other one. I think like in this case, I had to make a lot of different buildings. So I was always keep batching, a lot of the geometry and a lot of the stuff that all the details from one building to another, even though they're like completely different. So like if I would have had to guess, I think like I saying, like knowing what I already know about making this building, it took me really a small amount of time to do it. And once I'm happy with like the way it is, that's when I start to doing all the detail that I want to. So yeah, maybe I spent like a couple of days to make this building. But once I started doing two, three, or four, or seven buildings, that time starts to go down dramatically. And maybe like at this point, once my texture artist starts to like apply all the textures into like all the bricks and all the stuff, that's where I go into like all the corners and I add it. Maybe I spend like maybe another day or two to start to like break the corner of it, like break the silhouettes of it, like adding like all the posters, all the little signs all about it. It's almost like set dressing. Like to me, it's called set dressing.
Hmm.
I'm set dressing this building, adding all the details necessary, and that's kind of like where the fun actually happens. Where like I want this, I want, when you're standing right in this corner, let's say if I'm this character, if I'm looking over here, I want to see this silhouette with all the breaks and all the edges of it. I don't need to spend that right here in the middle of it because you'll never see the edge of it here. But like I only spend the time where I need it, where I only see silhouettes. Anything like right here, I'm gonna be able to see and put all the details on the edges that I can see because that's where the players are gonna be able to look at it. You know, uh, So I spend the time as needed, to make the building good. So we don't really have a, almost like a schedule per building in a set. I make my own schedule when I'm working.
Hmm.
So I don't really need to tell anyone else what my schedule either, other than like tell my leads or my directors, oh, look, it's gonna take me, like a few weeks to have all these buildings done because I think I have an idea how long it's gonna take me for each one, but it's kind of like all the buildings are gonna be, depends how much detail it is. This was, it doesn't really have a lot of detail, but there's other buildings, that are gonna require a lot more detail than this one.
Amazing. Well, I hate to say it, but we are running a little late, and I do want to respect your time, Edgar, but I do want to say like this has been very, very, very amazing, and it's been great to get kind of an insider's look into your process and just hear about your story. If you want to just finish up with maybe some last words about your mentorship, anything you'd like to share with us inspiring artists, any finishing statements?
Well, I mean, I didn't prepare any statements for
Yeah.
the end, but like, I'm always, willing to share with other people. Like, you can, especially here in Forge, you can always like message us, and we always want to give the feedback as as fast as possible to be able to share ideas, share processes, and be able to share with everyone how do we do things. Like, to me it's not a secret. What I do, like, I'm not like hiding it behind like a pipeline or anything like that. What I do is creative, and if I'm able to like express and be able to inspire other people to continue doing art and to be able to be successful in a career. That's what we're here for. We're here to share ideas, to share knowledge, and I'm hoping more people are able to take advantage of that, because there's no really a lot of places out there that you can be one-on-one with someone, to be able to ask the questions. Because at the beginning, when I started my career, I didn't have anyone to ask anything. I had to like learn
Yeah,
on my own, in a sense, asking. But like I never, I didn't even know any artists that even make any money making art, or to give me any advice on like how to do anything. I have to like kind of learn little by little on my own. And I think right now we have so much information out there, and it's just up to us to be able to search that information. No one's going to push anyone. Like no matter how much I can teach you to do something, you won't be able to do it on your own until you don't put your own effort into it. And I
that's
think
right.
that's really, really, really important to look at yourself and like, okay, how much effort do I want to put here into it? And doesn't matter if you're gonna fail or not, because we all fail at all
That's right.
times at every single project, including me. After so many years, I still, sometimes I start something and I like, oh, this is not going in the right direction. So I have to like, pivot and start like figuring out something. But quitting is not an option for me. Like, to me, like, continue learning, continue trying, and asking as much, questions to all my coworkers or all my friends or online, is the way to go. And never be shy of it, even if you don't know, even if it's a simple question. Like, there's never a simple question. It's always the level, to learn from. And we're here for it. So I hope you take advantage as much as you can, for us to be here to be able to help you.
This is such an amazing space, guys. Like, just to talk to all of us about anything that you're working on, get some quick feedback, take some notes, talk amongst each other, right? Alongside all of us here, I like to say that this community has no walls, right? Like, we really, really want y'all to post and ask questions because this is all of us here, right? Edgar's right here beside us. And all of our other amazing mentors here as well are here to help you and just give their advice. And I just want to say thank you so much, Edgar, for even, doing this demo talk with us and kind of hanging out and getting everybody familiar with you. And I really appreciated this talk, and I speak for everyone here, and we're very grateful for your time. And thank you
Yeah.
again. And
I mean, we're
yeah,
also going to be in GDC like
we're
in
gonna
a
be at
couple of weeks.
GDC.
I'm gonna be there too. So if you guys want to talk in person, meet in person, we'll be there. Come with your questions. With your demo, anything that you guys want to show us, we'll be there and give them as much as advice that we can. So
Yay! Yeah, we're really excited. Stay in touch with us, everybody. Post in the channels. We'll definitely see them. We'll make sure all of your questions get answered. You can go back to the live stage QA forum, continue asking us some questions over there, and tag us. We'll see them, and we'll keep the conversation going. Okay? So thank you, everybody. Again, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, no matter where you are in the world, and I hope to see you all very, very soon. Edgar, thank you so, so much. You have a good rest of your day too.
thank you.
Thank you guys. Take care, everybody.